Namaskar. Hello and welcome to P Guru's channel. I'm your host Vijaya. Joining me again after a lapse of a few months is Vijaya Viswanathan, co-author of the new book that she has written with Rajiv Malhotra ji, who is Raising Your Children. What is this book about? Should every parent be concerned? And so why? All this and more, let's hear from the author herself. Vijaya ji, namaskar and welcome to P Guru's channel. How are you?
Namaskaram. I'm so happy to be here, Shriji. It's been a few months, but we just released our new book, Rajiv ji and myself. It's called Who's Raising Your Children. It's available now. And I thought we should definitely talk about it because there are some interesting things that are happening in the education front, the world over and in India. So we need to be aware of these changes that are coming without just sort of creeping in unbeknownst to many.
Absolutely. So I'll yield the floor to you because there's much to discuss. Over to you.
Okay, so essentially, what we're trying to say here is there are four different education subjects, if you will, that are entering the system. Yeah, in the US, Trump actually came to power because of one of the reasons he won the election was because of the rot in the education system, and the similar thing has been happening to India as well, and so essentially the big part of it is something called comprehensive sexuality education. You can put up this slide for this, Shriji, because it is a little yeah, this is the new book. This Okay, I should talk about the cover briefly. This is the mouth of a snake, which is Aghasura from the Bhagavata Purana, where Kamsa sends his chief Aghasura to trap the children of Vrindavan, and therefore he could get Krishna as well. So the children all walk into this cave, very dark cave, but got a lot of crystals and shiny things inside. So they are trapped and they're attracted by this, and then they get into the mouth of the snake, and of course Krishna saves them all. So this is sort of the thing that we used as a metaphor to what's happening to the children of India. This is not all fully done, but it's in the works, it's in the process, and this book is sort of an alarm bell. There are lots of things that the Indian education system is doing well. We don't want to take away that, but we're just extremely concerned about certain aspects of sex education and social emotional learning, global citizenship education, these kinds of things that have entered the curriculum, and we're extremely concerned about that, and hence this metaphor of Aghasura. So if you go to the first slide, you have the old style of sex education, which is about sexual hygiene, abstinence, responsibility, risks and safeguards, prevention of sexually transmitted diseases, prevention of unwanted pregnancies. Those were the kinds of topics, sexual hygiene, things like that. People would agree that children need to be taught this as they're entering adolescence. But now you have something called comprehensive sexuality education. Now, the devil is always in the details. These very nice sounding words like holistic, comprehensive, child centered. You have to sort of look in a little deeper to find out what exactly they mean. So, what makes old fashioned sex education comprehensive? And it's just not sex education, it's sexuality education. So, these are all nuanced wordplay. There's a whole world of difference. So comprehensive sexuality education is about this woke idea of sex education, where you teach children to enjoy the pleasures of sex. We're not against enjoyment of pleasures, but to actually go seek them. So go seek your desires, go after erotic sexual experiences, and don't worry too much about the risks of these behaviors, because we have solutions. So they don't they talk like, okay, this will prevent sexual activity and minimize risk and all of that, but in fact they teach children to focus on treatments for sexually transmitted diseases rather than the prevention of it, right? There's a big focus on teaching children how to masturbate and other sexual practices. For example, if you want to teach a child that it's not good to be pregnant as an adolescent and avoid pregnancies, one would think that the sex education would tell them abstain from sexual activity because you'll get pregnant. But that's not how these people approach it. They say that you go seek your desires, go after them, fulfill them, and don't worry. And just in case you get pregnant, we have fixes for you, right? And even before you get pregnant, they say, okay, don't go through the conventional intercourse, but you can try other forms of sexual practices which will give you the same amount of pleasure or more pleasure. So it's a very pleasure focused sex education. Teaching children to have like anal sex so you won't get pregnant, things like that. Yeah, and these are standards. When I say who are these people, these are essentially world standards that's coming from the United Nations, WHO, the UNESCO. So these are big organizations that we look up to with so much reverence, right? They are like world standard organizations. They're setting a standards for education throughout the world. But this is essentially what they are doing. They also want to encourage and normalize LGBTQ lifestyle. I think in India, we are always tolerant and inclusive of people who have sexual preferences that are on the so-called fringes. But here they normalize it. It's always in your face. You want to teach children about sexual rights. That's the other thing. So you want to groom a bunch of children to fight for sexual rights, which will then go against their parents. So these are very dangerous sort of sex education in this garb of comprehensive sexuality education. If you go to the next slide, it'll always come in very nicely packaged words, right? So under the pretense of sexual risk reduction, they will promote abortion, and they don't say, they don't teach about abstinence. It promotes activism and advocacy, promotes contraception, and there's a very casual approach to abortions even. That don't worry, we can handle abortions. And then they also always talk about this research-based, evidence-based education. And if you look at some of the research and the evidence, they're all sort of circular. We have one whole chapter on WPATH, which comes up, which is this organization with a very dubious past, and they come up with the standards of care for gender dysphoria, and they've come into India as well now. They've penetrated the AIMS, All India Institute of Medical Sciences. And in fact, there have been WPATH files, people showing how they have falsified data. It's essentially an organization that is very political, far left, and how they've made their way into mainstream. But they've come into India as well. So under this pretext of evidence-based, research-based, so they all refer to each other's work. And there are big non-profits like International Planned Parenthood Foundation, which makes its money on abortions, right? And it's a 2 billion. It's a non-profit, but it's funded by many European governments, the US, and they promote abortions and gender-affirming care, things like that. Now, and under the pretext of sexual rights and sexual citizenship, they promote the independence and decision making of the child without the parents' knowledge. So it essentially subverts parental rights over children. So these are sort of things that parents should know before they sign up. Nobody's really signing up, but these programs enter the schools, and it's up to parents from a grassroots level to oppose these kinds of programs. So if you go to the next slide, Shri. Now, how are they entering India? Yeah. Now, they are entering India through many routes. So the Ministry of Education is a very difficult route to enter, for these international organizations to come into India. Because the Ministry of Education, they have found, in fact, there was a pilot project for the past 14 years in Jharkhand, where the Jharkhand state government has totally sold out to these NGOs. And they have found, they've done a lot of research, and they found that there's resistance from parents and teachers. Some of the teachers don't want to teach about masturbation, things like that, to the tribals, While all along, the literacy and numeracy is like plummeting, right? But we are introducing sex education. Now, some of the state governments, in 2009-10, they saw this Udan program in Jharkhand. They said no. Gujarat said no. Rajasthan said no. All of that. But unfortunately, there is this SDGs 2030, which is the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. All the nations have signed up to this SDG 2030, that they will achieve certain goals by 2030. Now, under the umbrella of sustainability, you have everything under the sun. You have human rights, social justice, sex education, women's rights, everything, and all of them are based on woke ideas. But the SDG, the United Nations clearly says these SDGs should be achieved based on, should be culturally sensitive, and also your local laws should accommodate them, and or you go by your local laws, whatever they are. So China, we compare China and India as well. And China very nicely changes a bunch of laws. They bring in a bunch of regulations as far as education and sex education is concerned. So they are not going by the United Nations standards. They're establishing their own standards, which are more like the old-fashioned sex ed, and the UN is very disappointed, but they can't do much. Whereas India is like wholesale taken on this UNESCO WHO version of comprehensive sexuality education. Now, so anyway, so the Ministry of Education is a tough sell, because there are parents and there are teachers, and it's very hard to bring it in. Now, the other two parts are this Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So the CSE has entered the something called the Rashtriya RKSK program, which is a Ministry of Health program, which is called Rashtriya Kishore Swasthya Karyakram. And this is a program which is essentially gives NGOs a free hand to do whatever they want in this program. So the RKSK program essentially is supposed to, and it does a lot of good things. I'm not going to throw the baby with the bathwater. It dispenses sanitary pads for girls in rural areas, and so there are some good things there. Now, like I said, the book focuses on the troubling issues. Now, the RKSK program says that there should be these adolescent clinics all over India, which is again not a bad thing in and of itself. But over here, they have something called youth peer educators to teach other youth in the villages and in rural areas about sexuality. Right now, peer education is very powerful, and these peer educators are trained by the NGOs, right, based on these UNESCO standards, things like that. Now, these so the RKSK has adolescent clinics, they have peer educators, and they also have they have something called Snake AI, which is a robot that is funded by the UNFPA. So if you don't want to ask your parents about it, you can just talk to this robot and get sexual gyan on what is okay and what is not okay. And then they also have so they also have something called wellness ambassadors, which is through the Ayushman Bharat program. So every school in India, it has to have two comprehensive sexuality education teachers through the Ayushman Bharat program. Again, it doesn't come through the education ministry, it comes through the health ministry. Now, if you have, so these two people in every school, now it's paid by public funds, and they are trained by people like Tata's Foundation, and all the NGOs come in and train. So your literacy and numeracy is plummeting, whereas you have time for this kind of sex education. You have two wellness ambassadors in each government school. And so this kind of focus on CSE is clearly some pressure from outside. And of course, you have public-private partnerships, which comes up. Now, I'm just going to show you just over here, just sort of how much it's infiltrating. Although the entire program is not there, the content is not fully there like how you have in UNESCO, what UNESCO would like, but the infrastructure is being laid so that once they get in and all the students are signed up, then they can switch the curriculum easily. That's what they do all over. Now, Population Foundation of India is a very well-regarded NGO. It's founded by JRD Tata, and Ratan Tata was on the board of this, and all the Tata groups, they fund Population Foundation of India. Now they have outside funding as well. There's an organization called CIFF, a foreign NGO. They fund CSE scale-up projects, youth-led action for sex ed. So they have these programs to scale up sex education in India. Now, Population Foundation of India, they do the training of these Ayushman Bharat, these ambassadors, right, in each school. They do the training of all of this for the government for free, right? And now HCL is the other culprit here. HCL Foundation, they have a huge platform, and they call it ARSH, meaning adolescent reproductive and sexual health, something like that, right? So the ARSH for you is a huge platform where they actually train teachers online on comprehensive sexuality education. Now already this arch for you within between Tata and HCL, they have MOUs with Bihar, they have MOUs with UP, even the scouts, Bharat Scouts and Guides. So you're talking, you teach them about gender fluidity, you teach them about how there are no two genders, how you can try out different genders, all in the name of inclusivity, and this sort of getting into a new normal. So then you have Rajasthan, and then you have MOUs in Manipur, Uttar Pradesh, all over. And then, of course, they have a UN-funded Snake chatbot, which I mentioned. So this is like a huge thing, and they've already signed MOUs, and they are beginning to train teachers and slowly train the students as well. You can go to the next slide, Shri.
Next one, please. This is one. Next one. Legal interventions and so on.
Yeah. So the other thing, so I've talked about, okay, how it's hard to get in through the MHRD. It's easier through the health ministry. Now, interestingly, the legal ministry is also being penetrated. Now if you connect the dots, so in 2020, there was something in the parliament where the opposition said we had signed up with some international organizations that we'll start CSE, but there's been nothing. So the Lok Sabha issued a memo with just CSE on the title, and then they said all schools should have comprehensive sexuality education without saying anything else. So this was in 2020. In 2021, the upper limit for abortion increased to 24 weeks from 21 weeks. Now, abortion in 2016 in India was over 1.6 crore abortions. I don't know what it is today, right? You cannot have a casual approach to abortion, and civilizationally, it's considered Bruna Hatya. And there are, in Chandogya Upanishad, we talk about, Pancham Agni Vidya, where anytime the jiva at whatever state it is, to do a hatya is a mahapapa. Things like that. But there are ethical concerns is my point, right? So we made the gestation limit from 21 weeks to 24 weeks, right? And 24 weeks, a fetus is viable. This is 6 months you're talking, yeah? And a fetus is viable. So, okay, so that's one more dot. Now, in 2021, you had a proposal to increase the age of marriage of girls to 21. Now, the Niti Aayog proposed this, and everybody sort of accepted, saying women's empowerment and adolescent health and all of that, right? That was the reason. Now, how did they come up with this? The Niti Aayog asked a bunch of 21, 22-year-old youngsters, do you think we should increase the age from 18 to 21? And they said, of course. So that was the reason they recommended this. Yeah, and it went through. Now, interesting to note that this applies only to Hindu girls, because Muslim girls are allowed to get married at 15. Yeah. So on one side, we are sexualizing our children. Again, since RTE, Right to Education Act, only applies to the Hindu schools and government schools, the Christian schools and the madrasas can easily say we don't want any part of this. So you're sexualizing mainstream Hindu kids, and then you want to increase the marriage. So they're allowed to have sex, they're allowed to have abortions, but they should not get married till 21. So something's really wrong with this picture as to how we are re-engineering our society, right? So, in fact, in Jharkhand, the Hewlett Packard Foundation is a donor for the Jharkhand project, where they had a 14-year study of implementing CSE, comprehensive sexuality education, and scaling it up. And that's sort of it's considered a very successful project, where they want to apply those same learnings in Africa and other impoverished places, Zimbabwe and Benin and places like that, Indonesia. Now, there they sort of say that everything went well, and some of the learnings is, the Catholic schools were a bit of a pain, because they wouldn't allow this CSE to be taught in their schools. So as a remark, as a learning. So obviously, because of Right to Education Act, only Hindu students will be subject to these kinds of subjects. Yeah. So then in 2022, very interestingly, there was a big push. There was UNICEF is a partner of the MHRD, but UNICEF, along with an NGO in India, came up with this proposal to lower the age of consent for sexual activity to 16 years from 18 years. There's an act called the POXO Act. I think it's Prevention of Child Sexual whatever offenses, something like that. To protect, it's a very child-centered act to protect children. So, and a child is considered someone below the age of 18. So, so they wanted to change the POXO Act, and because the POXO Act says there cannot be a sexual activity below the age of 18. So what they did, UNICEF came up with this policy report, a recommendation to the law ministry, saying, but with the, with the NGO, they co-wrote the policy report with the NGO, and then they essentially said that we should reduce the age of consent from 18 to 16, because you know what, there are some cases, they showed some cases in Madras, some Verma report, where they said that there's a 19-year-old having sexual relationships with a 16-year-old, and these sorts of these things happen, and all of us of course understand there can be a 19-year-old with a 16-year-old, and it's really not an adult having sexual relationship with a minor if it's a 19-year-old. But the system already has a place for these kinds of cases. They have special courts to deal with adolescents who are just over 18 having sexual relationships with other adolescents, and so they handle it in special courts where the penalty is not that big, right? It's not the same as a 60-year-old having an affair with a 16-year-old. So those are handled in regular courts. So they came up with this, and they recommended to the law commission, saying we need to lower the age. And the law commission said, no, we need to keep POXO as it is, because we believe in protecting children. There could be child trafficking and other problems because if we lower the age. Now, there's another organization, I think NCPCR or something, which is again another organization in Delhi which is in charge of protecting children. So they said, you know what, they did a little more due diligence, and they found that the UNICEF report itself the data was fudged, it was falsified, and said not only do we not accept this recommendation, we think this has to be withdrawn because it's full of false data. And immediately the UNICEF withdraws itself from this partner, which is NGO partner, although it co-wrote this policy recommendation, right? It says no, but it still remains the MHRD's education partner. So that is how much these guys have entered. Now, the future is essentially to make sexual rights fundamental human rights, and when that happens, it will allow minors to freely engage in sexual activities with adults. And this is where the pedophiles all can be set loose into society. There's already in the United Nations, there is effort to make human rights, sexual rights a human right. And once that's done, then you cannot tell a baby or a toddler that you don't have a sexual right, because that's your fundamental human right. So that's where this whole thing is heading. You can do a next slide. So essentially, to wrap it up, you have legal interventions, you have medical, you come through the Ministry of Health and then the Ministry of Education, and of course through all the NGOs. Now, but this is comprehensive sexuality education that I just spoke about. The other very troubling subject, if you will, that's coming in is called social emotional learning. Of course, it sounds good, it sounds great. Who doesn't want to be socially and emotionally balanced and well, and have good well-being in these areas? Of course, everybody does. Now, Rajiv ji calls this digestion. So the social emotional learning has two streams. The first was through a person called Daniel Goleman from Harvard. He was a PhD from Harvard, and he is the proponent of emotional intelligence. He made a ton of money writing about emotional intelligence. So Dan Goleman has a very interesting background. He goes from Harvard, he goes to India. He spends a lot of time with Neem Karoli Baba in North India. And he learns meditation and things from him, and then comes up with this emotional intelligence. Yeah, and he digests that into Western psychology, becomes hugely successful. Now, the other stream of digestion comes from the
when was this, Vijayaji? 60s or 70s? Daniel Goleman?
Around the 90s, 80s.
When
90s.
I thought Neem Karoli Baba died fairly early.
I think 80s, 90s, because Goleman writes, unless Goleman went to, he was in maybe 70s, 80s. I'll double check and tell you, because he did meet Neem Karoli Baba. And in the 90s is when this whole emotional intelligence became a huge thing.
Oh, okay.
You know, was a New York Times bestseller. So I'm assuming between 70s and 80s. So we can check that. Uh, and then the other stream is through the theosophists, right? The occultists, the theosophists, with Helena Blavatsky and Alice Bailey. So Helena Blavatsky has had the student called Alice Bailey who went to America with and started and continued Blavatsky's the theosophy movement. And Alice Bailey student was this guy called John Fetzer. He had a baseball team in Detroit, the Detroit whatever, what Lions are they? I don't remember. But anyway, so he used the ideas of yoga, meditation, and all of that to train his baseball team, and they won many baseball matches, games, and became quite well known for employing these meditation and other practices in his team. But so they both get together and go to Yale, and they come up with something called social emotional learning, because Goldman has the emotional intelligence, all of that from Karoli Baba. Then Fetzer's also sort of toyed with these ideas, and they come up and they form something called Castle, right, which is like the epicenter for everything social emotional learning. Yeah. Now, over time, what happened is critical race theory and queer theory and all these woke ideas get added to social emotional learning, and it becomes transformative social emotional learning, which is essentially mind control and rewiring the brain of children. Now, this transformative social emotional learning is called SEL right now, and it essentially is sold back to India through the UNESCO. The UNESCO has this center called the Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education and Sustainability and Peace, something like that, MGIEP, in Delhi. Now, this is supposed to be a category 1 institute in New Delhi, funded by, initially to start, funded by the Indian government. And I think it still continues to be funded by Indian government, although many private players want to come in there they are very interested in the data. Yeah, go ahead.
Vijayaji, Neem Karoli Baba died on 11th September 1973. Just wanted to tell you that.
Okay. Good. Then
It was
Goldman
fairly
must have,
early on.
yeah. So
Yeah.
Goldman must have learned all this and come to Harvard and written it, and then taken those ideas and repackaged it as emotional intelligence. Yeah. So anyway,
He met in the 70s. Yeah. Go
in
ahead.
the 70s. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So then what happens is now SEL is now repackaged. It's a $10.3 billion industry, right? It's going to be by 2030. Yeah, it's a huge industry. Everybody is offering social emotional learning as long as they're Castle certified. So again, it's a program, you need certification. And so UNESCO is in India. This MGIEP is offering these packages and they have a whole, they themselves say they use psychology, mind science, so psychology, behavioral science, and neuroscience to rewire the brains of children. And they call these 21st century skills. Yeah, again, you have to find out what does 21st century skills mean, because even in our NEP we have that word, the skills for the next century. And so one must poke in and say, what are the skills required? You might think it's reading and math, but that's not what they're looking at. So it's coming back to India, repackaged, like how yoga has been sold to us. So but unfortunately, social emotional learning is about mind control. So initially you will have some om chanting and pranayama and meditation, and you might get carried away saying, what the hell is wrong with that, right? So it does have some good parts like that, because if the child is anxious or something, they try to calm you down with these practices. But the ultimate goal, if you go to the next slide. Yeah, so there are two sides to, I know that the thing is really small, but I'll probably talk about the points on the slide. So there is indoctrination and there is monitoring, which are the two disturbing parts of social emotional learning. If it was just yoga, meditation, and mind sciences, we would not need social emotional learning from the UNESCO MGIEP. But since it's more than that, so there is this indoctrination of equity and social justice, lens in all subjects. So they teach activism, allyship, they instill guilt. So very interestingly, the MGIP itself says what we do to change behavior. They take two conflicting sustainable development goals. Yeah, because this is all a United Nation thing, right? So for example, you could a child could say, be told that you need to be compassionate and to everybody in the world because you're a global citizenship. So global citizenship education is also a big part. So since part of global citizenship education, you say we have to be our neighbors. Borders really don't mean much. You have to be compassionate to everybody because there could be floods in Bangladesh, and you have to provide for that and all of that, which is good. Then and then there is these national borders that you have to maintain your own sovereign land, and you can't let anyone come in illegally. So there is migrant problem. So the child is given these two conflicting SDGs, where on one side you're told you're a citizen of your nation, and the other side you have to be compassionate, and the child doesn't know. They're not adults, they're little children. It starts from kindergarten, so they don't know, or they have to deal with world hunger while you're eating your lunch, right? So what happens in the child's mind is cognitive dissonance. So the UNESCO MGIEP, they say we purposely take two conflicting ideas, put it into the child's mind, and create a conflict which causes stress, and that stress is called cognitive dissonance. Right now, this cognitive dissonance essentially manifests as fear or anxiety, depression, fear, anxiety, and anger even. And that is why you find all the youngsters, you find all these youngsters are all anxious about climate crisis. They don't know if the world will be there. Yeah, go ahead.
Vijayaji, what is the root purpose for changing something like this? I mean, um, it seems like at an impressionable age, you want to simplify the way things are rather than make them more complicated. Here, you are looking at way too much complications for a child of 7, 8, 9, 10, or even 15, and burdening them with all these things. Why should a
Exactly.
child be concerned about world hunger? The child should be
Exactly.
concerned more about what is the learning phase, right? What is
Exactly.
wrong with the dharma artha kama moksha model? And before we go further, we have a lot of slides to cover. I am not sure we'll be able to do that in this slide, this hangout. We can do it as a second hangout. I just wanted to stop here and ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Okay.
India
Yeah.
has come out with a new education policy now. You think of that as a Venn diagram, that's a circle, and all these things are coming in. Is there a lot of intersect, no intersect, or how do you see that?
A lot of intersection. So the four main topics come into the system is the social emotional learning, comprehensive sexuality education, global citizenship education, where they teach children that migrant crisis is okay, you're a global citizen, all of that. China looks at it, teaches for the global citizenship education. They teach their children about the Belt and Road Initiative. They teach them about tariffs and World Trade Organization and how you bargain, and the history of tariffs, things like that. Whereas India doesn't have a program. So if you look at the NEP, it has things like in fact the NEP does say that it has to be aligned with the SDGs 2030. It's something that we've all missed. It does have things like emotional and social and holistic. It has these words in there all over, although not in this. You can easily you can easily reinterpret the NEP to match the SDGs. So sometimes I wonder in my head if the NEP was in fact crafted keeping the SDGs in mind. I sometimes wonder now when I relook at the NEP document, at least the first couple of pages, I do feel that, and there are some good parts to it, like learning in native language and things like that. But equity comes into the NEP. Child-centered learning comes into NEP, and even child-centered learning is not as benign as it sounds. It means the teacher don't have direct instruction. You should get away from the old-fashioned direct instruction of children, and you should move to a more child-driven, loosey-goosey, soft approach to education, like how it is in America.
No, at least in America, right? They are encouraged to ask why. Children, if you tell them a concept in physics or chemistry or whatever, right? The children are encouraged to ask why. Whereas in India, it has been rote system. I mean, there is a fundamental way of teaching itself that needs to be looked at. I'm just saying that is this, way too much load on a young mind.
So what is giving is, I mean, in fact, if you go down further to a few slides, you will see what's happening in America as well, and what is happening. Yeah, you can skip this. Go down further. Yeah, further. So this is what's happening in America. Yeah, where bottom, when you see all the dotted lines at the bottom, are basically science scores, math scores, reading scores. This is in color, but I just got it in black and white, I guess. But this is in so the scores of science, math, and English and reading are all low, even though the government has been spending. This is all inflation adjusted, right? They're spending much more. The line that's the steepest and goes up is essentially the amount of spending on children, and yet math and science and reading scores are down. And if you go to the next slide, we see the same things happening. This is again minimum proficiency levels that the Niti Aayog is measuring, and you can see how our literacy and numeracy is also going down, because we all these new subjects are coming in, right? So what is giving, what is in, because we don't even have time in the day, if you ask any teacher, to have a 3 language formula. We don't have time to teach. And now we have global citizenship education, environmental education, comprehensive sexuality education, social emotional learning. All of this is coming in, and so that is the problem. We just don't have time. And now what has to give is literacy and numeracy. So the essentially, I just wanted to finish up with the social emotional learning, because when you do social emotional learning, you are rewiring the mind to have a favorable disposition to these SDGs and these globalist idea of no borders, and having a CRT, equity based mindset, things like that. Do away with meritocracy, get into human rights, social justice. So the social emotional learning, essentially, even American parents essentially said, we do not want social emotional learning because it makes activists out of children. So the idea of social emotional learning is to make a whole generation of children become social justice warriors. That's what it is for.
But then you're also dumbing down society.
Exactly. Because now with AI, so the globalists feel with AI, and you give everybody a universal basic income, and put virtual reality goggles, and just let them perish. And if they get into transgenderism, and if they don't reproduce, then we bring the population down, and that would be a humane way, I guess, to do away with the population of the world. So I guess that is where it's going. I mean, it sounds like a conspiracy theory, but if you connect the dots, that's what it's looking like. So then, here is a US. So again, the climate change is another thing. For example, we heard about USAID and the menace that they're creating, the mischief that they're doing. The US State Department is funding climate action podcast, right? So this is the environmental education that they get, right? I mean, the flavor. So in India, so what the US State Department does is it funds something called the Climate Action Podcast. So of course you would say, okay, so let somebody bring awareness about climate change and the environment, but to encourage India's commitment to fighting climate change. So that's the said purpose. But they cite example of successful US mission podcast that it wants India to emulate, including so some of the podcasts that they're funding is asking little children as young as 7 years old, what's a man and masculinity in India. So that's a topic, like a show that interviews Indian boys as young as 7 years old and men across the LGBTQ plus spectrum to discuss perceived issues with male female binary. So clearly, this is not about climate change. So this is the kind of, so all these words, right? They have they are very nicely packaged, and but you have to go in and see what exactly all these things mean. For example, holistic. One of the international organizations that's looking at Niti Aayog and India, they're saying, this is India's thing is not education, not holistic. And of course, you would say we want it to be holistic. And their idea of not being holistic is they're saying that India is too fixated on numeracy and literacy, and it's not holistic. That's what they mean by holistic. right? So similarly, when you say comprehensive sexuality, it's so comprehensive means adding all this other garbage in. Child centered learning would mean bring down the standards, let teachers not be the, give old fashioned instruction, let it let be led by children, and talk about social justice, awaken their consciousness to social justice issues. So same thing with equity and sustainability. All these words are extremely loaded, and I think we need to look at these things, these ideas coming in from the outside, and affecting our children, and how they think and rewire. They're essentially trying to rewire their brains. So it's a serious matter. Oh, okay, now this one goes into who calls the shots on education. So how does it come into India? So there are billionaires that fund. There are global NGOs who craft the narrative, the laws. What are the standards? Like you have UNESCO standards for ITGSE, standards for sex education, and who's crafting that? You have Planned Parenthood and all these other NGOs that are crafting the narrative, the laws, the policies. And then you have the UN mandates all the countries, and India implicitly complies. That's essentially what's going on. So you have US, UK, then USAID, all these people, funding. You have IPPF, which is the Planned Parenthood Foundation, the usual, Amnesty International, Oxfam, all these people. They give gyan to UNESCO, because they a lot of all these people are funded by these big billionaires as well. So WHO, OECD, World Bank, UN Trust Fund, WEF, UNICEF, UNFPA, all these guys bring in these policies, standards, laws, and they want to put it into the doorway. So the gateway to for all of them is the Niti Aayog. So the Niti Aayog essentially recommends and monitors how we're doing on sex education and social emotional learning and all of that, and they make recommendations to the parliament, the legislation, all these NEP and NCF and NCRT, laws on marriage, consent for sex, CSE, AEP is adolescent education program, all of them, RKSK, global citizenship education, and mine, all of them comply with those mandates. So we go to the next slide. So this is, you look at this and you think, whom does the Niti Aayog really work for? Because they're reporting to the UN. You have all kinds of UN organizations around. In fact, the Niti Aayog
why does India even care about what UN says and does? Why does it even care? You shouldn't even be given the time of the day to UN. So loaded, useless piece of junk.
Exactly, and that's why the Trump administration has got out of World Trade Organization. They've got out of WHO because they don't want pandemic treaties. They don't want the WHO to be mandating what they should do in a future pandemic and take off the American sovereignty, whereas India has just signed up for all this. Now, if you look at the Niti Aayog, you wonder, whom do they work for? Do they work? So we need a Doge kind of a group that looks at all these ministries and says, who the hell are you guys working for? Because the Niti Aayog itself, through its Atal Incubation Lab, funds two programs, two software companies. One is DATMate, which is SEL program, which is social emotional learning, and that DATMate gets also funding from USAID. So you can well imagine what it's about. And then you have another comprehensive sexuality education program for youth, which is called Stand We Speak, right? So the Niti Aayog, what it can't do through the front door is funding through its Atal Incubation Center these startups, right, which are also funded by the UN, UNFPA, World Bank, all these people. Then, of course, the three big perpetrators in our own corporations are the Tatas, which through the Population Foundation of India. Then you have the HCL group, which is training teachers, as I said. And then, of course, you have the Piramals, also not to be left out, are bringing social emotional learning from Emory University into the Niti Aayog. The partner for education consultant for the Niti Aayog is Boston Consulting Group, and Boston Consulting Group is also, BCG is the education consultant for the World Economic Forum as well. So you have this incestuous group of organizations and companies that are taking over education. So they lobby through the government, through the Niti Aayog. They get certain legislations done. In fact, Planned Parenthood Foundation, in its report to their American bosses, basically said that they had three successful legislations in India. Yeah, change in legislations. I don't know what they are, but they said that three. So it's a lobby. So Niti Aayog is a door for lobbies to come in and change legislation. And once those legislations are changed, they already have programs of SEL and CSE to plug and play. So you have the RKSK system that they lobbied for successfully, I'm sure, and the government implemented it. And the minute they implemented, the peer educators are trained by them. The adolescent clinics are staffed by the NGOs. Everything is run for the government by the NGOs. So and here we are worried about IKS and NCRT textbooks, but that's not the game at all. They lobby, they change legislation. The one the legislation is changed, they come in with a plug and play package, a toolkit, a program that fits into that. Now they're using more and more platforms, AI platforms and bots to bypass gatekeepers of children, traditional gatekeepers of children. If you go to the next slide. So here, leaving parents out. So that's the big idea. So Niti Aayog's Atal Incubation Center, it leaves parents out of all of this. They have MOUs with state government, CRT based, critical race theory based, social emotional learning. It talks about equity, global citizenship, climate activism, and data collection. Huge amount of data is collected during social emotional learning programs. So the AI bot is essentially an intimacy coach, teaches children how to, all matters of being intimate sexual relationships, how to go about them. They talk about gender fluidity, sexual rights, sexual pleasure, all of that. And parents are, of course, nicely left out. Now, the next one is, again, this is the Ministry of Health doing the same thing, leaving parents out. You have all these Satya Sale, which is a mobile app which young people can use to ask questions or related to sexuality. And there are 2 wellness ambassadors, like I mentioned, in each school, adolescent friendly health clinic. So the NGOs are providing the services. Parents are left out. You don't need parents because there are peer educators. The peer education is extremely successful, Shri. In fact, the Indian team, Math Olympiad team, right, has been winning medals lately, the past couple of years. One of the IIT professors who was interviewed, they said, how come suddenly Indian math team is doing well? And he said, one of the things we've started doing is to get past Olympic stars and have them come and be a peer educator. And that has been tremendously impactful. So you have peer educators, for Math Olympiad, that's a good thing. Peer educators for sex education, I'm not so sure. So I leave it to you.
There are fundamental problems with India's education system. And to bring in all this stuff, I think it's overwhelming the children. I'm speechless as to why. See, the Planning Commission essentially appears to have been replaced by Niti Aayog. I mean, you have just renamed it. That's all. I don't know. I'm kind of scared. I'm really scared. Vijayaji, I'm really scared. In 10-15 years, we are going to have I don't know what to say. See, people are not even able to do basic reading and writing, even up to 8th grade. And then you are telling them you need to do all these things. So there are some things that are base instincts, right? Those base instincts take over. For example, finding out your own sexuality. And
it's also culturally, right, Shri, in the Indian culture, it's not, you just don't go after whatever desire. If you want to eat now, whatever, there is about Indriya Nigraha, how you don't go after instant gratification on certain things. There are these sort of values that people teach children. And this is bypassing everything and, in fact, pushing children to go after sexual desires, erotic sexual experiences. In fact, some of the books, and that's what happened in the US too, is some of the books that are in these libraries for 10 and 12-year-olds in Virginia, parents would show it up because they were how-to books on on sexual acts, and they would be all blurred out because of obscenity laws on the air. So but the parents would say, but come on, my 10, 11-year-old is reading this. What the hell is this about obscenity laws? Let the world see what my 10, 12-year-old is learning. So this whole push to sexualize and to then there's this whole effort to make transgenderism a normal thing. So the book has all these sort of interventions that are coming in to change and rewire society of Indian children, and it comes at a time when the poor of India finally are so aspirational. Every auto driver or dhobi I meet, they say, "Oh, we're working, 18 hours because we didn't get the education. We want our children to have an education, right?" So that is the poor of India. They are all aspirational. They all want their children to do well. They're working two jobs to make this happen for this dream come true for their children. And what we're cheating them of just basic numeracy and literacy, and bringing in sex education, social emotional learning, collecting vast amounts of data on them, which is again, it's very scary, because this data can be used to manipulate them. It can be used to say that, for example, there's so much data collected before a problem, after a problem. So from K to 12, the entire emotional map of a child is that much data they have. So they can trigger for social emotional learning too. They can offer some triggers. They can tomorrow your health insurance can go up because of your eating habits that you've had. So it is a scary world that we live in, and I don't think we're doing justice to the hundreds of millions of poor people that want a chance at being successful.
And let's hope that there is a silver lining here. Now that the Department of Education is almost going to be closed in the United States, in fact, it has ceased functioning. All the CRT and critical caste theory, if CRT doesn't have a hope, caste, forget it. So,
no, but yeah, I see that'll be good for the US, Shri. But
right. But will my question to you was, would that reverberate and reach India also, so that there's a slowdown of all this nonsense, that it is limited only to the state of Jharkhand?
I'll give you an example, right? See, we can't wait for some white knight to come and save us.
I know. We should understand what is being planned here. We should understand what is being.
I'll give you an example where so this is a huge weapon. That's why the USAID uses this. USAID spent some $20 million to develop transgender comics in Peru, right? That was one of the examples that was given. USAID is going to get rolled over into the State Department now. Some of those, because these are very effective tools to topple governments and cause social disruptions in foreign countries. So it's a good tool for the US. So why would they dismantle it if they can use it? That's one thing. Second thing, China, interestingly, in the China Morning Post, so there's a drag queen story hour, which is, again, I don't know if your viewers know it. It is these men with a sexual fetish called autogynephilia, where they get a sexual arousal by dressing up with prosthetic breasts and skimpy women's clothing, high heels, and they get a sexual high. So it's sort of a sexual fetish, and it's an adult thing. If it should not be brought in front of children. Now, drag queen story hours are becoming very popular in India now, in this big metros. Now in Bangalore, and they have these very sexually suggestive names, these drag queen story hour drag queens. They have like Monsoon Lush or Little Miss Hot Mess, names like that, very sexually suggestive, with two kindergartners. Now China says that India does not have a consistent comprehensive sexuality education program, and they should do more to bring in drag queen story hour to all of India, so that they are more inclusive, things like that. And whereas China itself doesn't do any of this. So China just does a propaganda saying India is very inconsistent with sex ed. So this is a very powerful tool to break up a country. if you want to, and we just let everybody, all and sundry, come and do this.
A civilization that doesn't respect its women is no civilization at all, according to me. And you know which civilization I'm referring to here. These bullshits can be written anywhere you want, any amount you want. You go and fix your male female ratio, idiots. Then talk to us. Let's let it be. I mean, Chinese are beneath contempt. Forget about them. Let's talk about India. Now, surely some people in the know, for example, in Niti Aayog, are seized of at least this book, hopefully. Has anybody commented anything? And any are they reviewing what to be done?
See, Rajiv ji is never invited to Observer Research Foundation or any of the think tanks or any of the government. This time he's addressed some lawyers, Supreme Court lawyers in Delhi. We addressed some people in JNU and Vivekananda India Foundation. So we started doing that. But there, I think the exposure of this whole thing is very troublesome, and I hope people read it and take it as a positive criticism, when the constructive criticism. We want the children of India to improve. We want the education system to improve, like how we want it for America as well. We want American education system to be rid of all of this. So I hope somebody takes a note and they are serious about it.
Thank you so much, Vijayaji. We have a few questions for you. Manoj wants to know, sir, I heard in a podcast that Alexa Mini secretly listens to all our conversations and stores it in CIA servers indirectly. Is this true, sir? Your views? Alexa, it's for you. I don't think so.
I do not know, but it's, the data is a new gold, so we should be careful. That's what I would say.
Next one, please. SG wants to know how environmental education of SDG is impacting our kids in Bharatiya values. This year, my kids' school has included those topics only to bring out the creativity as solutions for these.
See, SDGs, not all SDGs are bad, and like China, we should have our own solution, our own civil. So in the book, we also give a framework of how. See, we look at, and Rajivji talks about this at length. We look at the environment. There's a difference in how we look at the environment versus how the West looks at the environment. The West looks at, you want to save a stream and clean water so that fish can be there, and so that we can have good fish to eat, which are organic, not polluted, all of that. Whereas the Bharatiya Drishti is we look at this, the river has a right, the river is a devata, the fish has its right. So the universe, the earth is not for you to consume, but the earth is there, and you are just part of this cosmic network. So that, I think, is the fundamental difference between how our environmental solutions should come out versus just adopting environmentalism that the West has given. So this environmentalism and creative projects are all fine, okay, superficially, but are we teaching our children that each of these things, the world around you is divine and sacred? And I think that kind of a drishti, you look at the Kumbh Mela and how the three rivers are deities. So that is what is more important, because once you have that drishti, you will never pollute the environment.
Next one, please. Brands Legal wants to know, unfortunately, parents don't have alternatives to state board, CBSE, ICSC, etc.
I think you do. I think you can definitely, home education doesn't take much these days. The amount, yes. You just need a bunch of parents to get together, and you can have a fantastic home education co-op. It just takes a bit of courage, and courage can be contagious. You start something, and other people will also get motivated. So there are alternates if you want to go that path.
Next one, please. Arvind Naik says, also feel the prefix international added to the school's name is also part of the conspiracy to corrupt the whole education system and also destroy it.
Yeah, there is, of course, you can't blame everybody, right? So it's easy for Shri and me to sit here and say that, yeah, don't worry about international and all of that. But, dharmasya moolam arthaha. So we want people to be successful. And unfortunately, the international schools offer a gateway to get a degree in these, whatever, colleges with prestige and then get a job. So what we need to do is to have homegrown solutions that are that are excellent. Like in China, not many Chinese children these days go to America or the West to get an education, because Chinese institutes are, on par or better than some of the institutions in the West. So we need to do that homegrown. You cannot force people not to do that. They should be free to do whatever they want, whatever they choose for their education. But we should have a system, homegrown system, that is as good or better, where we are all clamoring to go to these institutions.
Next one, please. Manoj wants to know, Madam, can we really overcome this issue? In olden times, we have our temples freed and education is not that much Western oriented, but now it is not the case. Your views?
You can overcome it. I think you need to keep a pulse on what your children are learning. You need to be active in the school. You need to gather a lot of parents and protest, like how American mothers are. I mean, there is Moms of Liberty who actually brought down the Department of Education and the school boards and all of that. So mothers are very powerful, and you should always watch out what your children are learning with apps. So you have to, it's all work, you have to be a parent, and it's fun being a parent. It's not just work, because it's a short duration that your children are with you, and you should enjoy them. When you're 60 years old and your children are gone, you shouldn't be longing for a phone call from them. And that's what most people do when they're young and they want to be with you. You don't want to be with them, and when they've flown off, you're just waiting for a call or asking them to come home, and they don't want to. So I think when they want to be with you, I think you should want to be with them and enjoy the journey.
Thank you so much, Vijayaji. Much food for thought, especially for parents whose children are just starting out in colleges, in schools, I should say. Sorry, not colleges. Colleges is too late. At schools. And viewers, please refer this thing, watch it more, because Vijayaji had to cover a lot of ground, and the signs are all there. For some reason, we still have this impression that anything that comes from the West is, really good, and we should imbibe it. Same thing about the word international also, and that's not really true. And you're seeing now people are coming back in hundreds to India. They are being forced to come back. There's actually another episode I'm going to do in the near future. Vijayaji, do you know thousands have returned back to India from US because you run out of, after some time, you run out of all these H1 time, that time, this time. There is nothing left to do. You just can't, I'm not saying you can't hack it. It's just that there are not that many opportunities. Now with AI taking over much of the testing, evaluation of software and things like that, that sector is completely collapsing right now. Completely collapsing.
Correct.
So with much food for thought.
We can also use AI and all these other resources to educate our children, get back Indic knowledge systems the way it should be. In fact, when we entered this book, we were looking at how to bring out Indic knowledge systems and have different subjects incorporate Indic knowledge systems. But we just want the education system to be as it was 20 years ago. That's how desperate the situation is.
Yeah, so the book is available in Amazon, and I'm sure it will be also available in various bookstores. Rajivji never does things in half measures. Thank you, and wish you all the best, Vijayaji. Many more books in the pipeline, I'm sure.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me. And I hope your viewers take this bull by the horn and do something about it, because it's the next generation we're talking about. Absolutely.
Look, viewers, look, my children are grown. So is Vijayaji's. Her youngest is already in masters now. So, and Rajivji has grandchildren now. We are all done. What we are seeing is a gross, distortion of facts. That's what is really rankling, and only some people can understand the depth of this problem. Most of us are weighed down by your day-to-day problems. You don't have time to lift your head and see what is really happening. So please take some seriousness and watch this video, especially with your significant other, and please do make sure that your child gets the right education. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you. Namaste. Thank you.